so excited for our first virtual masterclass of 2023. And I think people have been saying, isn't it crazy how fast January is already flying by? It's almost the end of January. And I do need to say that it's my birthday on Saturday. And I was telling James that at this age and stage, I'm roping people in for a cold water swim at 6 o'clock in the morning at Blouberg. So if any of you want to take up cold water swimming, feel free to meet us there. I'll give you coffee and rusks afterwards. But actually what we're here to do is to talk to James, which I'm really, really excited to do. James is one of those humble people who always comes across as less famous than he actually is. See, I told you, he's doing it already. But if you look on TV, you will see snippets of James. If you look in publications, if you look in authorships, you'll see snippets of James. And his publications are only increasing. And I think James is one of those people who is very academic, but also just a really genuinely nice person, really easy to get along with. And we're really excited to meet with him today. I'm going to actually let him do his own academic type introduction and tell us a little bit about his career journey and his interests. But from my side, the reason we're talking to him today is because he has particular expertise and insight into the marketplace and into research that shows what do people want. And I think being in the world of recruitment and talent acquisition, talent attraction, there's all sorts of words, as we know, that get used to describe that. We're always interested in what are people looking for, and are they looking for the same thing? And going into 2023 and beyond, will they still be looking for the same things as last year? So James, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. I was trying to get him the end of last year and he was too busy, so I'm really glad we've got you now. So James, please do introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do and the type of work that you're interested in. And at this moment, James is frozen. Okay, we've got you.
I lost you for a second there. Hi, everyone. My name's James, and I'm not going to tell you about my career journey. But what I will tell you about is that I work at the University of Cape Town at a research unit there. It used to be called the UCT Unilever Institute. Is now the UCT Liberty Institute, and we really work mainly with marketers and businesses. So I feel a little bit like a duck out of water talking in the recruitment space, but essentially very similar questions do we get from marketers. You know, we get calls all the time. You know, please tell us about what's happening in the middle class. Are people going to be doing this? What are the trends for that? And I know that there's certainly a lot of overlap between the research that we do for the marketing community and what it is that the recruitment and the people resources community is interested in. So we've been doing this kind of work for about 20 years, and we do these kind of big consumer studies. So we look at, we don't look, companies will say, well, how many people are buying my toothpaste? We're like, there's lots of other people that can do that. But we look at big groups. So, the low income majority, what's going on? What are the trends? The middle class, young people in South Africa, older people in South Africa, the top 1 million households, kind of these bigger groups, and really try and explore them, as deep as we can. And really try and look at some of those bigger questions. Our most recent study, if you go and type in middle class, specifically the Black middle class in South Africa, you'll see some press releases about our recent study end of last year, looking at the Black middle class. The term Black Diamond was some of our early works as an institute. We don't use that term anymore and haven't for a long time. But certainly, is a familiar term for many. And again, having done this research and dug around in these topics, I thought it would be nice to chat to Jane and to all of you and to talk a little bit about what we found.
Thank you, James. No, I think that's fascinating, and it's good to know that you've been delving into this over the years. So I'm sure that there's patterns that you've seen coming through as well, in different economic climates, perhaps different locations, industries, classes, as you say. So James, can you tell us a little bit more about the scope of your most recent research in terms of what people, what do people find important? What are they valuing? What's coming out from it? Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we did this big middle class study, and obviously middle class is a little bit of a blurry subject. Most people, the first thing that they're wanting to find out attending a research report like that is, I want to find out, am I in the middle class? Like, where do I fit into things? But it is a very kind of it is a broad concept, and there are many definitions. But I think what's important to realize, and it's funny, we've been looking at the middle class for a number of years now. We were able to look back at old research. We were able to go back to participants from 15 years ago and see how they're doing now. Look at how their life has changed. Really wonderful. And I think a couple of things that I think are important to appreciate is the middle class, and I know this sounds intuitive, but sometimes in the world of wanting to be consistent and wanting to apply templates, we can forget this, that it is not a homogeneous group. And we find, not only will you find big differences between, for example, the white and the black middle class, but even within the black middle class, there's not a homogeneity. And, you'll see articles in the newspaper, Woolworths is targeting the black middle class. And, it sounds a little bit silly now because, 15 years ago, the black middle class was growing, was rising. Now it's certainly the majority of the middle class. But even then, there's huge differences between whether someone has just entered the middle class or whether they actually grew up in the middle class. And those kinds of nuances, I think, are important. And, those changes, I mean, those of you who've been in the recruitment space, I'm sure you'll be able to appreciate that, in your own environment. But the idea that, so much has changed in the last 15 years. If you go back to, the early to mid 2000s, when some of our kind of more famous Black Diamond, black middle class research came out, kind of one of the big narratives was, hey, since 1994, there's been this growth in the black middle class, households moving out of poverty into the middle class. And a big narrative was around asset catch-up. So you'd have, households that did not grow up middle class. They did not inherit a house from the grandparents, did not inherit a car from wealthy parents. They grew up in poverty. And so they were buying first car, first house. Moving into the suburbs for the first time, and that narrative was a strong narrative. What we're seeing now, a real shift, and the theme that comes up more and more, especially in the black middle class, is the idea of building generational wealth. And those shifts, they may sound okay, that's interesting, and that kind of makes sense. But even, when it comes to what people are looking for, 15 years ago, a salary was enough. Give me enough money so that I can buy the assets that I don't have, and so that I can play this asset catch up. Whereas nowadays, the salary, yes, it affords the assets, but a salary alone is not enough to generate a wealth, certainly not generational wealth, unless it's obviously managed very well, which we don't have a good reputation for as a country. And so, these, the implications in terms of, what people are looking for nowadays certainly goes beyond just just having the salary. It's there's certainly more nuance, definitely on their hearts now, and that was a very tangible shift that one of a number that we picked up, one of a number. I mean, I can keep going. I mean, let me share a couple.
Please keep going, because it definitely translates into, if people are applying for a job, because companies always talk about how do we attract top talent. And in South Africa, that translates into our employment equity plans and people needing to attract a diverse and inclusive workforce. So targeting Black people, and especially Black females, as a priority has really been a focus for most companies. So for them to have insight into what is important to top talent, if we're going to call it that, is very important, because then that influences how they engage, how they advertise their offers. So please do keep going.
Cool. Well, I think another big thing that came out of some research done in the economics department at UCT is, and I know that this is not, this will be common knowledge, but there was some real nice quantifiable data around a skills bias trajectory. And the whole idea of, you literally look at industries from agriculture, I mean, every possible industry, tracking over 20 years, obviously a bias towards higher skills. And what that means is, as, maybe you go back 20, 30 years, it was a case of, okay, so, what is your qualification? Did you get a degree? Did you get the right degree? Now there's this whole question about, am I getting opportunities to continue to upskill? And I think, that understanding that skills bias trajectory is very much part of the narrative at the moment. And so, I mean, even in my own industry, marketing, you'll find that, a marketing degree was helpful. It was a foot in the door, but the world of marketing now is very different than it was 15, 20 years ago. And so, am I getting opportunities? Am I getting space in the day to be able to pursue the short course, to be able to continue to grow? So I think that as a top of mind issue is certainly important, and I doubt that'll be news to many of you. I think also just understanding what are the stress points. There is a tension between what a company wants and what an individual wants. And as much as we would love it to be different and that everyone gets along and we all align, the reality is the company wants what's best for the company and the individual wants what's best for the individual. And, being able to at least be honest about that and then try and cross the bridge, I think is important. And, what is causing stress? Finances. Absolutely top of mind, major stress. And the middle class in South Africa is actually fairly resilient. So there is a fear of slipping back into poverty. There are money worries, but the resilience is certainly a lot more built into the middle class now than it was 15, 20 years ago. As there's been many learnings and a couple of recessions, etc., to teach us. I think health concerns have shot up the list post-COVID. That came out strongly in the data, and obviously mental health is very much tied to that. Fear of crime, and it was interesting, chatting to and exploring this with Black versus white participants. Fear of crime for white participants, has been high on the list for a long time. We had some of our thought leaders coming in saying, man, you know what? Crime was like the last thing on our minds, 15 years ago. We were climbing the corporate ladder and crime was a white people's problem. And that has shifted. I think, children's future, very much tied into the psyche and the worry and, just the ability and the how am I able to support my family members? And it's a term I don't really like, but black tax is very much a part of the South African lexicon at the moment. I wish there was a better term, and I've heard others, but you can't Google them because no one uses them. Is a huge thing in the middle class, and appreciating that person A and person B can be sitting next to each other in the same cubicle, can be earning the exact same salary. And yet, if I am just able to use that salary to look after my own aspirations, and my neighbor has to use a significant portion of their salary to look after their children, or not their children, their nephews, their uncles, aunts, their parents, it has an impact on everything. And I think, what we found, even in our research, is just having the empathy to acknowledge that, I think is important. I think, obviously post-COVID, I think the safety net is under strain for a lot of people, and there is a disparity between, as we looked at research and looked at the data, the amount of money in the bank as a safety net for white versus black middle class participants, very different. And again, these are all aggregates, and there's obviously going to be exceptions, but I think the idea, we know that job security is a bit of an enigma, but that is a very much a very real top of mind thing, is that, man, if I lose my job, it's not just me. and also that the safety net is different for a family that's been in the middle class for many generations. If I lose my job, I go and sleep on the couch at my middle class parents, or and there's a safety net. I've got social capital that I can tap into. Whereas for a first generation Black middle class household, there isn't that safety net. There is a very genuine fear of slipping back. And I think most probably, I can keep going and going, but I think that the side hustle is also quite topical at the moment. When we did the study in 2014, there was a lot more lip service being paid to it. So it was like, oh, I want to start a business. Oh, this is something that I desire to do. But literally, I think it was like 10, 14% said that they actually had an active side hustle. So it was a lot of talk, not a lot of action. That has shifted. That has shifted dramatically, I think, for all kinds of reasons, economic reasons, etc. That does have an impact on work. Is the employer willing to accommodate for that? Or not?
James,
and if
sorry,
they
can I interrupt you a second just on there? We lost you for a moment. So when you said that has shifted dramatically, and then we lost you, if you could just carry on from there.
Am I back? Yeah, so it's shifted dramatically in terms of, now that now that there's an actual tangible desire to pursue those in a very real sense. Question is whether employers are willing to entertain that, and if so, how much. And is it seen as a bad thing? Are you taking away from the company, or do I need to offer you that in order to keep you around? And I think that dynamic is going to continue to unfold globally over the next couple of decades. So it's an interesting space. Sorry, it's a flurry of ideas.
No, it's wonderful. It's really helpful.
Yeah, those are some of the things that came out.
Yeah, thanks, James. I think those are all. And as you're speaking, I see questions popping up in the chat, and you are answering some of them along the way. But we will have a chance to answer the ones we haven't been able to answer now afterwards. But just building on what you're saying around the side hustles, we've also seen that with companies. In the beginning, it was just a restraint of trade. You shouldn't be able to work in something that directly is direct competition. But companies have had to become a little bit more lenient. And some of that talks to, I don't know if this is something that has come up in your research, some of it comes to the sense of meaning and purpose and why people are working. Are they working to enable something that is seen as a hobby or a future business? Are they working perhaps, in the Black tax context of being able to support their family? But I know during COVID, we've seen a particular move, not just in the older generations where we saw it before, where just before retirement, people thought, or midlife crisis, am I doing what I'm really designed to do? And if I don't, I need to change, or I'm going to live with regrets. We saw that coming into our earlier career builders. But yeah, I don't know if anything around meaning, purpose, why I do what I do on that level has come out in the research.
Yeah, I think the big thing is, there's obviously a broad range. So especially in the side hustle, or even pursuing hobbies, a lot of it can be very much around finances, and I need to supplement my current income. It can be about, as I mentioned, building generational wealth. But I think, in terms of meaning and purpose, I think a part of it, and it's a bit of a wrestle with companies, and I've got lots of opinions about it, not necessarily based on anything empirical. But I do think, what is coming through in the research is this idea of, I don't want you to feel like you own me. And so if it's a hobby, let it be a hobby. If it's a side hustle, let it be a side hustle, but you are not my owner. And I think that, those kind of the idea of kind of corporate handcuffs, I think that fight is there. So, me reading or whether it wants, pursuing, something
James,
beyond
sorry,
myself.
if you can we lost you a little bit after corporate handcuffs. So if you could just pick up again after corporate handcuffs.
I will. Corporate handcuffs. Yeah, I think just that idea that meaning is quite broad. And, that meaning could manifest itself in the poetry reading and in the hobbies. But it also manifests itself in, I want to build myself to be something different so that I can pursue a future that I see for myself, and it may or may not be with the company. So I think it's about the relationship with the company as much as anything. And so, people do want to work for a company that they feel proud of. I understand that, and having a purposeful company. But sometimes a soap company just wants to sell soap, and it doesn't, to try and make it out to be the savior of the world is also can be quite contrived. And I think I think just appreciating that purpose and meaning is an individual thing, as much as it is something that can get tied together in a company. But it's an interesting space.
Yes, exactly. I think we were having a very interesting conversation this morning at the HR Works breakfast. And there we had a couple of HR people talking about what they're seeing locally and globally, maybe particularly in the tech space. But they said they've seen a shift from people having, because originally the balance of power in an interview or in talent attraction and acquisition, the balance of power was mostly with the employer, being able to sit back and pick and choose. Then with the war for talent, which not all countries appreciate that term, but in the war for talent, talent became more powerful and could start saying, you know what, I'm actually not going to work for you unless you allow me to work just 3 days a week. And we have heard that from some of our financial services clients recently. But what one of the HR people was saying is they think it's going to move back more to where the balance of power might be with the employer again because of the recession, and that people might be just happy to have a job as opposed to being picky and choosy. And I don't mean that in a derogative way, about how long do I work, what's the meaning, what's the purpose, what's the culture. So yeah, I'm just wondering, kind of pre-pandemic, during the pandemic, and now moving into post-pandemic and recession. Yeah, what impact do you think that's having on what people are wanting?
So great thought and great question. And I think what I was a little bit of a I don't know what the right word is. I can't even think of the right word, but I was one of those people that was like, you know what, once COVID's over, everything's going back to normal. And, like previous recessions and previous, difficulties that we've been through, our habits are quite set and quite resilient. And look, certain things have, and there's, less people wearing masks nowadays, but one thing that I was shocked by as we did post pandemic, or, I know we're kind of winding down, there's still COVID around, but in the big scheme of things, post COVID research was this absolute kind of resetting one's relationship with finances. And I think the 2008, 2009 financial crisis did that in a big way. And we saw that, and there was definitely evidence of that. But I think this has been something quite extraordinary for me. And the amount of re-looking policies, the amount of re-looking at financial situation, re-looking what does security mean, and I think appreciating that we've also, on the back of the financial crisis in the at the end of the decade ago now, over a decade ago, that was on the back of a period of economic growth. It wasn't huge growth, but it was reasonable growth, and there was a lot of optimism. And in our world, we talk about the 100 golden months, before the recession. And there was exuberance. There was, and then what we've had the last 10 years is essentially a low growth trap. And so, the feelings of coming out of a recession, optimistic and ready to go, it's a little bit more wobbly. It's a little bit, as you mentioned, be grateful for the job, be a little bit more maybe cautious, look a little bit more carefully at one's finances. And that does come through. And so, that prediction of a shift in power, I think there's some truth to it. I mean, how that will play out, I'm not sure. I mean, they're different things in tension with each other, but certainly, a real reset in relationship with finances, a hyper awareness around that, which I think is important to be aware of. And again, it's looking even in a recruitment point of view, maybe there's, things that one offers that you think these are normal, but to be able to even highlight those, hey, you get onto our group medical aid scheme, that will save you X much per month, and just, being able to not just assume that people all understand that, but highlight the benefits. I think it's, that sensitivity is there, and those agenda items are high on people's minds. It's a great way to sell a package.
Yeah, exactly. And I think something that you mentioned a little bit earlier that seems to be it's kind of, there's growing awareness around it and a growing sensitivity towards it, is you mentioned the word authenticity, and that wrestle between what does the company want and what does the individual want, and what is posted on the website as the values, and perhaps the kind of theater of, that they said kind of Google set up for everyone, which is, hey, you get a free lunch, the games evening, gym, lounge, baby care, whatever, those kind of things, instead of, okay, what does that translate into? What is that? How does that make people feel? That we don't just have a free lunch, we have a free lunch, which means people laugh together, which means they feel good about themselves, which means they love working there, which means they go home and there's a different, rub off on their families and how they treat them. But what I do find talent, and especially top talent, are particularly concerned with is that something you just speak about, or is that something we actually see? And if I'm in an interview with someone, whether it's a recruiter from a recruitment consultancy or a corporate, how are you behaving right now in this moment? Because that is telling me more about your culture than what you have on your website. And so I really like that you talked about the importance of having those authentic, honest conversations, because it can't be all about what the company wants, nor all about what the employee wants. Somebody's likened it to raising kids. You can't just give them everything they want. That's also not good for people. That doesn't create happiness and health. People need a little bit of tussle. They need a little bit of stress in a good way.
Very
so yeah,
nice.
any further thoughts on that?
No, you've articulated it. You've articulated it nicely, and I think it's it's an interesting time that we live. It really is. And look, I can't speak from a recruitment perspective in the same way that you can, but certainly from a consumer behavior perspective, it's obviously a bad move to overpromise and underdeliver. And I think that idea of kind of showrooming the company in a really positive way, and then people have a bad experience, just no one wins out of that. So whether it's if you're aware of problems in the company culture, being honest about it up front, at least, and you may lose a candidate, but there's a good chance you'll lose them anyway eventually if they're not happy. But yeah, I think it's, it's about authenticity, but it's also about integrity, and not integrity as in telling the truth. Integrity is just, what you say and what you do match up. There's a consistency there. And I think we all are guilty of wanting to present ourselves better than we possibly feel that we are. That's just the human condition. We do it in our clothes. We do it in many ways, and obviously companies will do that as well. But I guess try and find a little bit of a balance. And I've never met anyone who doesn't appreciate honesty. It sometimes needs to be said kindly. But being honest about a situation presents well.
Exactly. And I think, just leading on from what you say about kindly, James, there was someone in the conference this morning talking about that they've actually had to let people go recently. But their question to themselves was, one of our values is kindness. Even though we had to do something tough, did we do it in a kind way? And earlier you mentioned empathy, and that's really come under scrutiny in people's leadership styles, empathy and care. So even though there are those topics like black tax or other issues that are maybe awkward or difficult or not applicable to everyone, you're saying people handling those with empathy goes a long way. And that really helps to create the family culture that people are saying they really want to belong to. Doesn't always have to be perfect, but people want honesty and they want care.
Very much. And look, I mean, it's as simple as listening, isn't it? You know, I mean, you can ask questions, get some answers, tick them on a box and move on to the next question, or you can really listen and you can explore, and you can, and I think those things, you know, if someone feels like you've got to know them, and that might even come out in the offer that you give. You know, there's nothing worse than getting an offer and you feel like, they're not, do they, you know, do they understand my situation? Or versus, you know, really listening, hey, we could maybe include this, maybe we could do that for them, not just talking money, and show that there's a, you know, show that there's a little bit, you know, that the listening actually did happen. So yeah, I'm with you 100%. And a lot of that, I don't know whether that's something you know you work with, but even just the milieu of an interview room, you know, can make a difference.
Yeah, that definitely makes a difference, because I think if people feel relaxed and they feel valued and respected by the environment, even just by how you dress, how you introduce yourself, all of those things make people really show up as themselves and drop that guard that you're talking about, where we all want to present ourselves in the best way. But we can really access the real person by being respectful, by listening in a, listening with clarifying and confirming. And as you say, listening to what someone is saying and then basing an offer or basing a conversation on that, and not just following a script, which I find some interviewers do. And maybe it's because they're early on in their interviewing career, so they're a little nervous to go off it. But it's so important to have that human connection and conversation if you want to reach the real person and create that human emotional connection. So I love what you're saying, James.
Absolutely. Yeah, I must say it's an interesting space that you work in and that you live in. You know, I think
love it.
And maybe just, I mean, this is some advice I give to marketers, and I think the shoe kind of fits here as well, I suppose, is, you know, one of the biggest mistakes that we as marketers make is assume that the customer thinks like us. And I think that is very dangerous. Yes, if you've got a customer that's demographically identical to you, then maybe there's obviously some similarities, but I think not to ever assume that. And I think, you know, even as you talk, you know, what makes you feel comfortable in an interview would be different than what would make a 25-year-old feel comfortable in an interview.
Absolutely. And I was actually training interview skills to a global group the other day. And it was so interesting because somebody in one of the countries said, you know, for us to make people feel comfortable, and as part of our interview process, we actually need to ask them about their kids and their pregnancy. And the rest of us were like, wow, that is different. That is definitely not what you can do in South Africa. But I like that you're bringing up the importance of being in touch with what culture someone is coming from and what makes them feel comfortable in their culture. So, James, another point I just wanted to highlight that you mentioned was people offering, not just looking for someone with a qualification, but offering the opportunity for them to build their skills in the organization. I think that's been a very real area for us in South Africa, which I really appreciate as companies have offered more of that, especially with our employment equity focus. And I think other countries are still catching up with that. But it has come out in other pieces of research how important growth in an organization is for people who are joining the organization. And one of the things that they look at is, who will I be reporting to? Is that person's career history and profile and skill level one which will enable my own growth? So it's not just about the company, but also about who do I report to, which is why I do encourage people to build and share their LinkedIn profile, for example, in a way that isn't boastful, but it does show what value they can add to someone who's working with them. So that was also an interesting point that you mentioned. Thank you. So James is frozen a little bit. Oh, you're back.
Sorry,
you're back.
I lost you there. You said you did show, and then I lost you, and then I lost you.
Show on your LinkedIn profile, not in a boastful, arrogant way, but in a meaningful, authentic way, what value you can add to someone else who's working with you, because people want to be mentored, they want to be coached, they want to grow. And that also is something that gets passed on to generations, not just the financial aspect.
Very nice.
So, James, I know there are some questions in our chat box and I'd love to get to them. So before we do, are there any final tips that you want to give that you think could benefit interviewers based on the research that you've done? Any final words before we move on to our chat?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the only thing is just be willing to I guess it's kind of walk the tension. There's a tension between what a company wants, I mentioned it earlier, and what an employee may want. Obviously, knowing those things clearly, from both sides, obviously helps that. But it's like, in the same way, trying to understand the relationship between brands and customers, between retailers and shoppers. It's complicated. There's much science and there's many statistics out there, but there's also an art to it. And I think to continue to grow and to continue to keep learning.
Yeah, I really like that. Thank you, James. And it really is. I find this learning across industries so valuable, because it gets us to think about things we wouldn't normally think about. And it's also comforting to see, okay, this isn't just a trend in one industry. It's supported in other industries. So we can either continue the way we are going or say, oh, hang on, I actually need to adjust that or make allowance for something else coming up that I didn't see coming. So